Welcome back everyone to another reaction video. Well, I've had my eyes on this one for several days now. I saw that about a week ago, the Armchair Historian released a video called The First Major Battle of World War I, the Battle of the Marne. I've been waiting to give his video a chance to get some views, and I don't typically react to videos in the first couple of days, so now is the time. I do want to say up front, I think I disagree with the title of the video, and I'm probably just being nitpicky here, but I don't consider the Battle of the Marne to be the first major battle of World War I. Several weeks before this, we have the Battle of the Frontiers, which actually includes the single deadliest day for the French army and for any army during the entire war, where they lose somewhere between 20 and 30,000 killed in a single day in August of 1914. So it's hard, though, because when we're talking about 20th century battles, what do you really define as a battle? Because in previous years, the Battle of Gettysburg is a 3-day battle. The Battle of Antietam is a 1-day battle. The Battle of Waterloo is a 1-day battle. We get into the 20th century and we talk about battles like the Battle of Stalingrad. That's really a campaign, and that's something that goes on for months. The Battle of just take your pick. The Battle of the Somme goes on from July till November of 1916. These are really more campaigns that have battles within them. So you could probably make the same argument about things like the Battle of the Frontiers, which is basically the entire Western Front over the span of a couple of weeks. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. But this battle, the first Battle of the Marne, as it'll later come to be known because there are other battles that are fought there, is absolutely one of the most consequential wars of the 20th century and maybe in human history, because it puts a stop to any chance that the Germans have of seeing their Schlieffen plan play out the way they wanted to. It's when the French army really saves the Western Front with some help from the British. So we're going to dive into this one today. I have the link down in the description so you can check it out and check out all of Armchair Historian's great content without my commentary. I want to thank Wade in Plainfield, Indiana, who signed up as a patron several weeks ago. Really appreciate that. Let's dive into this one.
Paris is in crisis. The war had seemed so far away, and now it was here. Desperate refugees try to flee the city as cars are strewn by the wayside. A monoplane airplane adorned with iron crosses drops bombs and an ominous message on the City of Lights. The message was as simple as it was alarming. The German army is at the gates of Paris.
It wasn't entirely true that they were at the gates of Paris, but you have to remember there are still people living in Paris at this time who are old enough to remember when the Germans were able to march into Paris at the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71. And that is still fresh in the minds of some of these people. That we're talking 43, 44 years. So if you were 18 at the time of the Franco-Prussian War, you're in your 60s now. So you remember this stuff, and you would have heard about this stuff from family members. But this whole idea of bombers, this is a new thing. You've got not only traditional kind of fixed-wing bombers, like the Gotha bomber that the Germans will employ, but you also have the airships, like the Zeppelins, who are dropping bombs not only on places like Paris, but also throughout the United Kingdom.
The chaos, a lean, bespectacled man stands resolute. Joseph Gallieni, military governor of Paris in September of 1914, proclaims, "I have received the mandate to defend Paris against the invader. That mandate I shall carry out to the end." In August of 1914...
Whoa, wait! Armchair Historian's animated now. What's up with that? That's new.
Germany faced a long-dreaded two-front war against France in the west and Russia in the east. Thus, in accordance with the infamous Schlieffen Plan, the Kaiser's armies embarked on a bold mission to defeat France in just 42 days.
42 days. You're talking 6 weeks. That's the plan. The idea is that the Russians are big and slow and will take time to mobilize, so you can defeat France like you did 40 years ago. They were able to march in and do it quickly, and like they would do 20 years later, going through Belgium, getting around the French defenses on the Western Front there at places like Verdun. win quickly, and then move all of your armies to the east to deal with Russia. Didn't work out that way.
Unrelenting fury, the Germans struck into Belgium, attempting to outflank the French defenses and seize Paris.
And the Germans didn't want to go to war with Belgium. They just wanted to send their armies through. They even reach out to the king of the Belgians and say, hey, we don't want to fight you. We just want to move our armies through. Can you just let us pass? And the king's like, no, that's not happening. And the Belgians put up a stubborn defense at places like Liège. And they're able to slow down and bottleneck the German war machine enough to buy some time for the French, but also for the British to get troops over there.
However, the Germans were not alone in taking the offensive. As the Great War erupted, military thinking was swept up by a veritable
cult of the offensive. Yep.
In that line of thinking, an attacking army would prevail over a defensive one.
And even if you're being attacked, you should take the offensive at your very first opportunity. That was the mindset. And that's why, we watch some of these horrible offensives at places like Verdun and the Somme, and we think, why would they do that? Why would they march into artillery and machine gun fire and barbed wire and all this stuff? Well, that was the mindset. That was the doctrine. It started to change as the war progressed.
So in response to the German offensive, France executed its own attack, better known as Plan 17.
This is the
French armies would strike into Alsace-Lorraine and southeastern Belgium, where they planned to defeat the Germans in a single decisive battle.
That's the Battle of the Frontiers.
Over 2 million troops fought the resulting Battle of the Frontiers, the largest battle in human history up to that point.
So, if he's calling this the first major battle of World War I, why would he talk about the largest battle in human history to that point taking place first? I guess I'm a little confused by the title. I should probably let it go, though.
For the Entente, the battle was a disaster.
Yeah.
Although the recently arrived British Expeditionary Force, under Sir John French, mounted a dogged defense at the strategic city of Mons, the far more numerous
And I want to pause right here and just say that if you want to see some great videos about that site at Mons, my friend Rob, who has a channel called History in Your Hand, does a lot of World War I content, just as I do on my channel, Stories of the Great War, links in the description. But Rob has done some videos about the Battle of Mons that are definitely worth checking out.
French troops were soundly defeated. Lesser training, lesser quality weapons, and conspicuous, easily spottable military uniforms all worked against France in the early years of the war. Additionally, the excessive offensive spirit of the French army and a lack of integrated artillery support made for a fatal combination. After being mauled by the German army, French Chief of Staff Joseph Joffre ordered a general retreat into northern France. During this great retreat, the French and British fought several rearguard actions and counterattacks as they fell further back toward the River Marne, where Joffre had redeployed his troops using France's extensive railroad system and created a brand new 6th Army near Paris. As September began,
and this is one of the things, there's a lot to criticize Joffre for, but he does some things right here in 1914. And among them is being willing to be flexible and to adjust and to respond to what's going on, and not just being rigid and sticking to what he's doing and sticking to the cult of the offensive. He recognizes the offensive failed. Now this is about consolidating and making sure that the Germans aren't able to take Paris. So counter that with what we're going to see from the Germans, which is that the Germans under Moltke are going to actually make a fatal mistake. And sometimes people do this in an attempt to try and win and make a decisive move. They make a mistake that ends up costing them the battle.
German cavalry patrols arrived just 8 miles or 13 kilometers north of Paris. It seemed like the German army may succeed in its ambitious Schlieffen plan. Despite the promising situation for Germany, the Kaiserreich faced several issues that complicated its nearby triumph. The French army and BEF continuously retreated in an orderly fashion, and German armies continuously failed to deliver a knockout blow. German logistics were stretched thin, as much of Belgium's railroad system lay in ruin, and
this is always the problem you have as the attacker, especially when you want to move fast in an industrialized age of warfare, is that you have to have access to trains and roads to be able to move massive. We've done videos on the logistical aspect of World War I and just the mind-boggling numbers of supplies, of food, of ammunition, artillery that you have to have every day at the front to be able to sustain an offensive. And he's right. Germany gets bogged down coming through Belgium, and there's bottlenecks with the railroads and with where they're able to move things, and this slows them down.
Armies moved further and further from their supply lines. Additionally, Chief of Staff Helmut von Moltke transferred several corps away from France to assist garrisons and screening actions in Belgium, as well as in defense of East Prussia.
And this is one of those moves I'm talking about that is brutally unfortunate for the Germans. If you're a German looking at this, is that he's got the momentum. They're falling back, and so thinking that they're needed more on the Eastern Front, he pulls troops out, and then he also is going to make some maneuvers with the troops as they get near Paris, and those are going to be costly mistakes, and it's going to lead to him being out the door in favor of Falkenhayn not soon after this.
Along with these problems, the greatest weakness of the German army was communication, or rather, lack thereof. The German armies operated near independently from one another, while Moltke was at his headquarters in Luxembourg, far away from the front. There was little to no coordination between army headquarters and the field armies. As the Entente retreated, the aggressive General Alexander von Kluck of the First Army decided not to encircle Paris from the west, but instead reroute his army east of Paris for a multitude of reasons.
Mistake.
As Kluck headed east to get closer to the German Second Army under Karl von Bulow, French command learned of the change of direction through radio interception, air reconnaissance, and a map they found on a dead German officer.
Communication and intelligence is everything.
This information provided France with a massive opportunity. The First Army was bypassing Paris, and thus exposed itself to counterattack. Both Joffre and Gallieni recognized the opportunity of the situation. On the morning of September 5th, the fresh Sixth Army, under General Michel-Joseph Manoury, attacked east of Paris and into Kluck's left flank. German reconnaissance planes had spotted the army before, but Kluck ignored their warnings and instead moved further south to attack the BEF and French Fifth Army. As a result, 150,000 French soldiers encountered just 23,000 German reservists on the River Aure. Despite the odds, the small German contingent counterattacked with concentrated artillery fire. A day of vicious fighting ensued, but by nightfall, the French surprise attack had been stalled.
I will say this, you're probably not going to see too much in the way of trenches. This part of, because they were showing the trenches there, so it made me think of it. This part of World War I is the fluid, the moving part. This is where you have a very traditional kind of big army movements happening. And it's after the Germans fail to take Paris that you're going to start having what's called the race to the sea, where they're not trying to get to the sea, they're trying to outflank each other, and they're trying to continue this war of movement and outmaneuver. But as they make it all the way then to the sea, then they're going to start to dig in, and this is where you're going to get what's going to define the next 3.5 years or so of the war, which is these trench lines with attacks at key places at key moments.
In response to this threat, Kluck aggressively rushed forces to his left and prepared another counterattack. The morning after, Joffre began a general offensive on a 160-mile or 257-kilometer front from Paris to Verdun, the largest battle Europe had ever seen unfolded, as over 1 million German soldiers met 125,000 British and 1 million vengeful French soldiers.
And understand that this is the bulk of what's available for the British Army at this point. The British Army does not have a large standing army. They've got a very small, very professional force, and they're just going to be obliterated. They're referred to now as the old contemptibles, because based on something the Kaiser said about them. But most of these guys are going to be killed or wounded or captured in the early months of the war. And what you're going to have later with this million-man BEF is going to be largely made up of volunteers and then later draftees.
Everywhere on the battlefield, advances were paid for at a terrible cost of human lives, while the devastation of industrial warfare was unleashed to its fullest extent. Artillery pounded the outdated infantry tactics of the last century into submission.
Artillery is the main killer in the First World War. It's not disease. There's a lot of disease later on with the Spanish flu. It's not disease. It's not machine guns. It's artillery.
Steel mercilessly rained down on unprotected men. The Battle of the Marne was a battle of mobility. However, the speedy battlefield maneuvers faltered in the face of new technologies. Machine guns mowed down exposed attackers. In one episode, an attacking Moroccan force suffered a horrific death toll of 85%. Especially among the French, there was...
I think that's probably a casualty total rather than a death total, because many of those men would have been wounded rather than killed.
A deep cultural opposition against digging in or operating from trenches. As a member of Joffre's general staff put it, the idea of organizing any kind of defense aroused an almost innate repugnance. Digging into the earth was believed to be a dishonorable gesture.
Yeah, this goes against everything that these men have been raised to believe about how you operate a war. They have grown up with these tactics, and anytime there's a major war, we see it in the American Civil War, we see it in the Napoleonic Wars, we see it in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. The tactics change because of the enemy that you're facing, because of the new technologies that have been brought into play. And this is the early months of the war where the tactics are not adjusted to fit the nature of the war yet.
During the battle, the men proved as cruel as the weapons they wielded. When a battalion of Germans surrendered by waving a white flag, the pursuing French soldiers kept up fire, resulting in the deaths of 450 men. Near Paris, Kluck's First Army was locked in a fierce battle with Mannerey's Sixth. In what would become one of the most iconic events of the entire battle, General Gallieni responded to the emerging threat by requisitioning around 600 Parisian taxicabs to quickly reinforce the Sixth Army, about 30 miles or 48 kilometers northeast of the city. Although the military impact of Gallieni's tactics was fairly minute, the move did have a deep impact on the morale of French troops and civilians.
Resist, fight.
As battles raged, French air reconnaissance spotted a decisive opportunity. After Kluck reinforced his left flank to meet the French Sixth Army, a 30-mile or 48-kilometer gap between his army and Bulow's second emerged. The French Fifth Army, under the command of the hard-headed and aggressive general Louis Franchet d'Espèrey, and the British Expeditionary Force pressed north into this gap, with the prospect of cutting off and encircling two German armies. The BEF, and especially its commander John French, had been hesitant to participate in the battle, but pressed forward after an emotional plea from Joffre. Although the BEF did not advance as rapidly as Franchet d'Espèrey and Joffre would have liked, their push into the gap turned the tide of the battle, as the right of the Fifth Army pinned Bulow at the Battle of the Two Morin. The BEF and left of the Fifth Army pushed deeper and deeper into the gap.
And so you hear there, some frustration from the French with how the BEF are operating. Remember that what we're dealing with here are two completely independent forces. The BEF is not under the command of the French. Even though they're trying to operate in concert and they're trying to work together, it's not going to be till much later in the war that you're going to get Marshal Foch, who's going to be placed in kind of the Eisenhower position of World War I for the Western Front, where he's going to be given complete command over all of the Allied armies that are on that front.
Bulow found himself under heavy pressure, with his flanks exposed. While French lines in the east seemed near cracking under German pressure, Bulow was in a major predicament. As fighting continued to rage among the massive front on the River Marne, the breakdown of communication between the German generals and high command became increasingly problematic. On September 8th, Moltke, who preferred to exercise command via an emissary, dispatched a liaison officer.
This guy's old school, and he's not the guy for this, and that's why they're going to replace him. Of course, all of the commanders of these forces are going to be changed within the next couple of years. You're going to go from Sir John French to Douglas Haig for the British. You're going to go through a series of commanders for the French army before eventually resulting in Foch at the end of the war. The Germans are going to go from Moltke to von Falkenhayn to then Ludendorff and Hindenburg late in the war.
Richard Hensch. He was to visit each of the army headquarters with verbal authority to use Moltke's name if redeployments seemed necessary. In the Eastern armies, little was out of the ordinary. After Hensch reported the situation there as favorable, he proceeded...
So, cool little, detail that I'm noticing here. These two guys are wearing what's called the Pour le Mérite, which is the... It's kind of the equivalent of the American Medal of Honor. It's pretty much the highest award you can win as part of the German forces.
To meet with Bülow and his staff. Here, the situation was approaching a breaking point. After receiving news the next morning that enemy troops were massing into the gap in force, Bülow decided to withdraw his forces north, behind the Marne, with Hensch's ascent. Following Bülow's withdrawal, Hensch ordered a highly reluctant Kluck to withdraw as well. 2 days later, fearing that the Eastern Army would be outflanked by the advancing Entente, Moltke ordered a general retreat north. The German failure at the Marne had far-reaching consequences. For a week, the Entente would pursue the Germans, who ultimately halted on a ridge overlooking the River Aisne and dug in. Several frontal assaults by the French were repulsed with enormous bloodshed. As a result of the stalemate on the Aisne, the Entente nations also dug in. Shortly after, both sides would try to outflank one another, digging in during each confrontation.
It's a race to the
From
sea.
the North Sea to the Swiss border, the highly mobile, offensive character of the first weeks of World War I on the Western Front morphed into 4 years of grueling trench warfare. Germany found itself in the one situation it had so desperately sought to avoid. It was forced to fight a lengthy two-front war of attrition. Years after the war, the failure of the Marne and the Schlieffen plan in its entirety would become a crucial part of the stab-in-the-back myth. Revisionists and nationalists blamed Moltke, Bülow, Hensch, and even Jews and Freemasons for denying what should have been Germany's triumphant 42-day war. For now, the men at war...
I mean, they weren't wrong in blaming those generals for the mistakes that were made, but the idea that it was somehow done on purpose or done to stab the Germans in the back and keep them from winning
would have to endure the grueling realities of the trench until almost exactly 4 years later, when another Battle of the Marne would finally break the seemingly never-ending stalemate.
Yeah, and if you are... let this play out. So if you are part of the 3rd Infantry Division in the U.S. Army, you know that the nickname for that is the Rock of the Marne, and that's going to come from that Battle of the Marne in 1918, where the elements of the 3rd Infantry Division are going to make a stand at the Marne River, and once again, that's going to be the place, and that's going to include battles like Belleau Wood, things like that. It's going to be the place that the Germans are going to be stopped during their spring offensive in 1918, where they're trying to win the war. So, good stuff. I enjoyed that. He always does a great job with his videos, so definitely check that out. Check out my friend Rob's videos over on History in Your Hand. If you want to see some original content related to some of the battles that were talked about here. And if you want to see some of my original content related to the Great War, check out Stories of the Great War. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching.